second generation Nissan Leaf aims to electrify the affordable part of the EV market, in more ways than one. It goes further, not only in terms of powered up range, but also in its efforts to bring new levels of space, comfort and technology to the full electric part of the family hatchback segment. In short, it's a sophisticated statement of just how far battery-powered cars have come. Whatever your opinion on EV motoring, this Leaf is guaranteed to surprise you. Think of an affordable all-electric car and it's probable that you'll be picturing a Nissan Leaf, the world's best-selling EV. The name is an acronym for Leading Environmentally Friendly Affordable Family Car, and this always has been, with over 300,000 models sold since the original design first went on sale back in 2010. In fact, almost half the full electric vehicles on our roads are versions of this Nissan. Now though, the competition's really ramping up, hence the need for this second generation version. It arrived in early 2018, just as the EV market was showing signs of finally taking off, fueled by more usable battery technology, widespread improvements to our country's public charging network, and general vilification of diesel power. As before, the Leaf is a Focus Class 5-door hatch that takes on rivals like the Volkswagen e-Golf, BMW's i3, and the Hyundai Ioniq Electric. Now though, it feels confident enough to also reach out beyond those wedded to milk float mobility and target mainstream buyers, probably those looking for an alternative to diesel. To interest at least some of these people, there was one thing this Nissan needed to dramatically improve: its operating range. To some extent, that box has been ticked. The distance you can travel between charges is still some way off Tesla levels, but you can go almost twice as far as you could in early versions of the original model, thanks to a much gutsier 40 kilowatt-hour battery, which this time round replaces the old 24 kilowatt-hour unit. It'll also help that the car now looks more conventional and that it's more drivable than before, courtesy of a torquier electric motor that's now 40% more powerful, putting out 150 PS. And there's more. A clever e-pedal system means you'll hardly ever need to use the brake, making your super refined journeys even smoother. Plus, there's a Pro Pilot package that delivers semi-autonomous driving capability and a Pro Pilot Park system that will slot your Leaf into the tightest space at the press of a single button. All at pricing which is even sharper than before, and which, thanks to government subsidy, can undercut some conventionally engined rivals. Sounds promising, doesn't it? Let's put this car to the test. Can an electric car really be enjoyable to drive? Absolutely. It's just that your parameters of what constitutes fun at the wheel might need broadening a bit. Not that there seems much prospect of driving reward at startup. Firing up a Leaf is about as interesting as setting a washing machine in motion. You press the start button, there's a momentary delay while virtual instrument zero emission graphics spring up in front of you and the various systems engage. Then you're ready to pull this mouse-shaped auto gear selector into drive. Electric cars are always, of course, automatic, and set off. A light tap on the throttle delivers the kind of seamless pull-away demeanour you'd expect from this kind of car. But a sharp stab with the right foot fires the Leaf forward like a scalded cat. In fact, if you're not careful or the ground is slippery, it's pretty easy to spin the wheels, even if you're not trying to look irresponsible. To some extent, this shouldn't be too much of a surprise. All full electric cars are initially quick off the mark. The torque, after all, gets directed straight to the tarmac. Most, though, tend to run out of puff above about 50 miles an hour. But this one doesn't. The increase in system power from 110 to 150 PS this time round, good enough to see the 62-mile-an-hour sprint benchmark disappear hot hatch style in just 7.9 seconds. The fun stops pretty soon after that. Top speed is limited to 89 miles an hour. But even if it wasn't, the rapid way that battery power diminishes with foot-to-the-floor driving is enough of a deterrent to over-enthusiastic progress. Anyway, there are other, arguably more interesting ways you can engage with this car, or perhaps allow it to engage with you. The one Nissan is keenest for us to talk about is the e-pedal system introduced with this second generation model. In effect, this merely enhances an attribute that all full electric cars always have, namely the way that the energy regenerative process that kicks in when you come off the throttle slows the car so much that you hardly ever need to use the brake. With this second generation Leaf, Nissan has developed that concept a little. Provided the e-pedal system is engaged, you can turn it off if you want. Regenerative force from the powertrain is maximised when you come off the accelerator, so much in fact that the brake lights come on to alert following motorists as the car decelerates by up to 0.2 G. Rival electric cars like the e-Golf provide paddle shift controls that allow you to vary the degree of regenerative input, accomplishing much the same thing. The difference with this Nissan though is that the system also brings ordinary friction disc braking into play at the end of the process and can, if necessary, bring the car to a complete stop without you needing to touch the brake pedal. It sounds a strange concept, but believe me, you'll adjust to it within 10 minutes of driving this car. Mostly, the only time you'll ever brake when driving a Leaf is when someone abruptly stops or pulls out in front of you, or of course when you're doing a fully fledged emergency stop. Even better, the whole process does a great job of sustaining the range of the lithium-ion battery, which this time round has a substantially greater capacity, up from 24 kilowatt hours to 40 kilowatt hours in size. Nissan has also developed an even gutsier 60 kilowatt hour battery for this model, but the 40 kilowatt hour variant I'm trying here should be quite sufficient for the needs of most buyers, especially given the fact that the average person's daily commute is no more than about 20 miles. This car's potential operating range has almost doubled with this second generation design and is now officially rated at 168 miles, according to the latest, more realistic WLTP, that's Worldwide Harmonized Light Vehicle Testing Procedure. Sellers of other rival models you'll come across may continue to quote range figures generated by the old, rather irrelevant NEDC New European Driving Cycle Test, which saw the range of this Mark II Leaf rated at 235 miles. So don't get confused. The bottom line is that if you compare apples with apples, you'll find this Nissan able to take you around 25% further on a single charge than a Volkswagen e-Golf, and almost twice as far as the all-electric version of BMW's i3. In the field of all-electric motoring, only a vastly more expensive Tesla model can manage more. But are the quoted figures realistic? They almost never are with electric cars. In our experience on this test, even the WLTP range prediction is a bit ambitious. We've actually been getting 120 to 130 miles from each charge, which is about 40 to 50 miles more than we were achieving when we tested the previous generation version of this model. That, though, is after making copious use of the various range-enhancing driving tools provided. The e-pedal system is one, but there are also others. We're not sure why you'd want full regenerative powertrain energy harvesting without the friction braking element, but if so, a selectable B setting in the auto gearbox will provide it. And you can also activate an eco mode that restricts throttle response. Of course, range is less of an issue if charging is quick and easy. When one day the 50 kilowatt rapid chargers that can replenish a depleted battery to around 80% of its capacity in just 40 minutes are commonplace on our major routes, no one will think twice about taking an EV vehicle on a longer trip. Today though, such a journey takes a little more forward planning, but plenty of tools are available to make that process easier. There are plenty of apps and websites showing charge point locations, and provided you've avoided entry-level trim, you'll also find a charging point location map in the car as part of the Nissan Connect EV7 infotainment system. This setup always knows where the nearest public charging point is and can direct you straight to it. In fact, it will do so automatically should you reach perspiration point when your Leaf is 7 to 8 miles away from being empty of charge. But let's take a step away from range anxiety and regenerative technology for a moment. This second generation Leaf is promoted as an affordable family car that just happens to be powered by a battery. In short, it's supposed to be the first EV that ordinary folk not completely wedded to Green Party principles might consider. Yes, increasing operating range is a key part of creating a full electric model able to make that difficult transition. But there are other boxes that need ticking too. The original version of this model was anything but a confident handler with copious body roll and PlayStation-style levels of feedback through its lifeless steering rack. This car needed to do better, and does. Body control is vastly improved, which is quite a decent achievement given that this Leaf is slightly heavier than its predecessor, tipping the scales at getting on for 1.6 tonnes, around 250 kilograms more than most ordinary diesel-powered rivals. A considerable upgrade in torsional rigidity explains most of the improvement. Plus, as before, it helps that the extra weight of the battery pack is perfectly placed and evenly distributed, creating an optimally low centre of gravity, pretty much the same as you'd find in Nissan's 370Z Sports Coupe. Given that this, along with this Mark II model's 40% increase in motor power and 25% increase in torque, might encourage you to drive this car a touch faster than before, it's just as well that all Leaf models now come with the Nissan chassis control package. We first saw this on the brand's Qashqai SUV model, a setup which incorporates two standard electronic handling systems, intelligent trace control and intelligent ride control. The trace control system uses the principle of torque vectoring, applying subtle brake pressure to the front wheels at speed through the turns. This loads up the front of the car, pushing the tyres more firmly into the tarmac and increasing their bite on the road. Intelligent ride control also uses the automatic subtle brake application, the system gently applying pad to disc, usually at the rear, after you've hit a bump in the road to ease back body pitch and keep the car more stable. This is the kind of technology you simply don't expect to see on an electric vehicle, and it all works without you ever being aware of it, giving a more fluid, flowing feel to the way this Leaf progresses down the road. True, the raised driving position isn't really one that encourages you to throw the car about, but former Leaf owners who do push on a little through the bends and put all of this technology to the test will quickly notice the improved cornering demeanour, which is aided by much greater levels of response through the helm, courtesy of a reworked and quicker ratio steering rack. They should also appreciate the way that the intelligent ride system allows this Nissan to cruise more serenely over tarmac tears. Only over lower speed bumps does the suspension patter about a bit. Highway cruising sees the car feel settled, planted and, of course, impressively quiet. Because you inevitably notice tyre and wind draw so much more with no engine noise to drown it all out, Nissan has worked hard on minimising both, with some success. If you've opted for one of the plusher Leaf trim levels, this is where you'll have the option to try the brand's latest Pro Pilot semi-autonomous driving package, which you can activate at the press of a button. This setup works through combining active cruise control and a lane keeping assist system, and will automatically steer, accelerate and brake the car on roads where the system's camera can read road markings and sense the car in front. Unlike some other makers' similar systems, this one doesn't allow you to let go of the wheel. You're roundly admonished by the car if you do. But despite that, there's no doubt that Pro Pilot is a great highway cruising aid. Plus, it also works really well in stop-start traffic jams. The system able to bring your Leaf to a complete stop, hold it there and start it off again. Which brings me to this Nissan's most natural habitat, which is of course an urban one, an environment that'll see you trundling along with even greater levels of eerie silence. Actually, it's not quite silent. While designers of conventional cars bust a gut to get noise levels down, Nissan has had to actually add sound to this one to counter public fears that quiet electric vehicles might, as they approach, unpleasantly surprise unwary pedestrians and the visually impaired. Hence the speaker fitted up front that produces a low whine at under 15 miles an hour to warn the pavement bound of your impending arrival. Those Leaf owners of a nastier disposition can switch this off. I should also mention the ProPilot park system that you can have on this top spec variant, which at the press of a single button can locate a space for you, then autonomously park the car and apply the handbrake. Town travel doesn't get much easier than this. So, how to sum up? Well, Nissan's experience in creating electric cars goes all the way back to their little Tamer model of 1947, and that kind of experience really shows in a product like this one. In a sense, it's not too difficult to be pioneering in EV circles if you're going to charge customers through the nose for the end product, as for example Tesla does. It's a lot harder to produce a cutting-edge end product if you price it against affordable petrol and diesel family alternatives. But this Leaf manages just that. It's quite an achievement. Here, if you ever doubted it, is proof that electric vehicles are now firmly targeted at mainstream buyers. The previous generation Leaf was never really going to sell to anyone other than early adopting eco-warriors, so was styled to make a futuristic statement. This car, though, dispenses with the nerdy vibe in favour of a more conventional look that still manages to appear contemporary, sophisticated and sleek thanks to a slippery drag coefficient of just 0.28 CD. Overall, this is a larger, lower and more sharply sculpted design that will broaden this model's customer base considerably. In profile, we particularly like the flared rear haunches and this smart C-pillar, which references that used on other contemporary Nissan models like the 5th generation Micra. The flanks that lead down to the continuously flat underbody could perhaps use a bit more definition, but a smart chiseled crease flows above the door mirrors, and on plusher models there's the two-tone option of a black roof finish if you want it. As before, this is a design shaped to compete in the Focus and Golf dominated family hatchback segment, though one that at just over 4.5 metres in length is a touch longer than the usual class favourites, and a touch taller too. Mounting the battery beneath the floor pushes the roof height up to 1.54 metres, which is closer to the sort of thing you get in an SUV like Nissan's Qashqai than anything Focus or Golf sized. Only the prominent zero emission badge on the front door gives away the EV ancestry. One thing Nissan hasn't done in a move towards design conventionality is to follow its EV competitors in putting the charging point flap on the side of the car where the fuel filler would normally be. On a Leaf, it remains defiantly incorporated into the beaky nose, which means that if you're at a public quick charging station, you can plug in, then if you wish, stay seated at the wheel and watch the fast charger tick over. As before, there are separate normal and quick charger sockets here, and the angle you approach them at has been altered, making it easier to plug in without stooping down. Otherwise, there are all the hallmarks of current Nissan design, including signature boomerang-shaped headlamps that can feature full LED lighting, and the brand's usual V-Motion nose styling, which in this case features blue colouring in a nod to the car's electric status. The rear is more raked and sporty than before, with a black finish for the upper part of the tailgate and tick-shaped tail lamps that form the starting point for the car's shoulder line. The lower section of the bumper is notable, of course, for the total absence of an exhaust pipe. Instead, a blue highlighting strip references the car's eco status. Finishing things off is this neat roof spoiler, though unfortunately it doesn't incorporate the trendy solar cells that used to feature on the spoiler of the previous generation model. As for the stuff you can't see, well, the body shell has gained 15 kilograms of weight this time round, so as to be better able to carry the 310 kilogram lithium-ion battery. A lot of effort's gone into making the structure more rigid too, right down to stiffer bump stops on the boot lid. And at the wheel, well, if you remember the original Mark I Leaf model, which featured a futuristically styled split-level blue-tinted dash, practically finished with bright white trim, well, this interior might feel a touch mundane. Most potential owners, though, are going to much prefer it. At first glance, you could be in any ordinary Nissan, a Qashqai maybe. The high-set seating position certainly brings to mind the kind of feel you get in an SUV. That's until you start to inspect the more unique details, the stubby little blue-tinged auto gear lever from the original model that has, rather unnecessarily, been carried over, and an instrument binnacle display that curiously mixes an analog speedo with an accompanying customizable colour TFT display. This area can be tailored to exactly what you want to see, with selectable power meter, audio, compass, energy readout and safety system screens. Less contemporary is the Nissan Connect centre dash infotainment system that's standard, provided you avoid entry-level trim. Now, it's supposed to be a development of the setup used elsewhere in the company's range, but the provided 7-inch monitor feels, well, low-res and dated compared to the displays provided by direct Volkswagen and BMW rivals, and can be tricky to view on bright sunny days. Still, at least you get the physical shortcut buttons and proper rotary dials that some rival setups unwisely dispense with. And everything you really need is here, with Apple CarPlay and Android Auto smartphone mirroring, alongside the usual DAB stereo and Bluetooth functions. Plus, there's a navigation setup that knows where every public charging point is and is always ready to direct you to one. You can also access Nissan Connect remotely via a smartphone app, planning a trip in advance or setting a timer to cool down or warm up the car before a journey so that you don't have to use valuable battery power doing so once on the move. Nissan designers don't seem to hold with the current fashion for dashboard decluttering. I've counted over 50 buttons. Still, that's better than having lots and lots of complicated infotainment screen sub-menu functions. For us, more of an issue lies with the fact that Nissan still hasn't made the 3-spoke multi-function steering wheel adjustable for reach. As before, it only goes up and down, which can make getting comfortable a bit of a challenge. Now, disappointingly, there's no front seat lumbar support either. Otherwise, there's not much to grouse about. Build quality from the factory up in Sunderland, Tyne and Wear seems pretty faultless, and the so-called gliding wing design of the dash is quite appealing, enlivened by vibrant blue stitching that also features on the steering wheel and the now more comfortable seats. True, you don't get the classy chrome finishing and really soft touch plastics that you'll find on rival e-Golf and BMW i3 models, but this Nissan's lower price point might mean you can stretch to a top spec Techno variant like this one, where full leather upholstery also extends onto the fascia, concealing the hard plastics beneath. That high-set driving position means your forward and side view is great, but the same can't be said for rear three-quarter vision, compromised a little by those stylised C-pillars. Fortunately, a rear-view camera comes as standard, providing that you avoid entry-level trim. As for cabin practicality, well, the glove box is big, but the door bins are small. There's nowhere for your sunglasses, and between the seats lie a couple of cup holders and this deep lidded box. There's also a small cubby in front of the gear lever that would be useful for a phone, given that USB, 12 volt and aux-in sockets lie just above. Let's take a seat in the rear. Bottom line, no other EV on the market can offer you more rear seat space. The bench back here can comfortably accommodate a couple of adults, and 3 kids will probably be fine too. Taking 3 large folk though is made difficult by the prominent height of this centre transmission tunnel. There's also the slight issue of this highish floor height caused because of the need to locate the vast battery pack underneath this seat. Because of that, when you're sat back here, your knees are positioned slightly higher up than they would normally be. Some folk might find this a touch uncomfortable on lengthier trips, though to be honest, unless you draw your passengers' attention to this issue, they'll probably never notice it. Headroom back here is tighter than it would be in an e-Golf, but that'll only really be an issue for people over 6 foot. You'd expect a fully connected car like this would have offered rear seat occupants either a 12 volt or a USB socket to connect up with here in the back, but no. Storage space is at a bit of a premium. These door bins are pretty small and there's no fold-out centre armrest to provide a couple of useful cup holders. You do get seat back pockets though. Now, the most important practical news with this revised Leaf lies further back. It wasn't long ago that electric vehicles suffered terribly when it came to the issue of luggage capacity, but that was when battery packs were located beneath the boot floor. I've already mentioned that in this Leaf, the lithium-ion cells sit further forward, so there's no reason why this Nissan's longer than average family hatchback sector length can't translate into segment-leading cargo space, which is pretty much what you get. Lift the tailgate and you find yourself faced with a 436 litre cargo bay, around 100 litres more than the previous generation model could offer. For comparison, the boot of a Volkswagen Golf measures in at 380 litres. An e-Golf is rated at 341 litres, and a rival BMW i3 only manages a rather embarrassing 260 litres. Unfortunately, there's quite a high loading lip to negotiate before you can get at all that room. And if you go for a top techno model like this one, you'll lose 15 litres of that capacity thanks to the need to house the subwoofer of the punchy Bose stereo. A couple of nets are provided on either side of the boot area to tidy all the charging cables away. Unfortunately, you have to pay extra for the convenience of a spare wheel. Spatially, things won't be quite as rosy if the need arises to push the rear backrest forward and free up greater reserves of cargo capacity. The rear bench is 60-40 split folding, unlike the solid backrest you get in a rival Renault Zoe. But the cargo area it frees up isn't quite flat, and the folded seats, as you can see, create quite a step in the floor that'll get in the way when you try and push things back. It's also worth mentioning that the higher floor level I referenced earlier drops this Nissan back behind its conventional rivals when it comes to ultimate space available. Still, the 1,176 litres of total fresh air that's provided with the seats folded like this should be quite sufficient for most. The Leaf purchasing process is a whole lot simpler than it used to be. The previous first generation model was sold either complete or with a battery that you had to take out a separate rental agreement for. Prior to plumping for either one route or the other, all kinds of elaborate calculations were needed based on likely future use. There's none of that now. This second generation Leaf wants to be seen as an ordinary alternative to any normal Focus Class family hatch, so it's only sold complete, just as one of those would be, at prices that range in the £23,000 to £29,000 bracket. I should point out that these are the subsidised figures that buyers pay after subtraction of the generous £4,500 government grant that still applies to all electric cars. For reference, these days you only get a £2,500 grant towards a plug-in hybrid and nothing at all towards a conventional hybrid. which helps explain why a Leaf can offer you much more technology than you get in something like a Prius hybrid, yet undercut that Toyota by almost £1,500. As before, Leaf buyers are limited to this single 5-door body style, plus of course front-wheel drive along with the auto gearbox that all EV models have to have. Trim levels range from base Vizia to a centre and N connector, all the way up to this top Techno variant. And rivals? Well, lots is happening in the all-electric market at present, but much of it is based around more highly priced premium contenders like the Tesla Model 3 and the Jaguar I-Pace. All of which means that this Nissan's key all-electric rivals in the more affordable part of this segment remain much as before. That means primary competition from 3 family hatch-sized battery-powered models: the Volkswagen e-Golf, BMW's i3 and the Hyundai Ioniq Electric. If you're considering the entry-level Vizia version of this Leaf, you'll find it able to undercut these rivals massively, beating the Hyundai by around £2,200, the Volkswagen by around £4,500 and the BMW by nearly £7,000. That's not really the whole story though. All 3 of these rival brands would surely point out that their base spec is more equivalent to that of a mid-range Leaf and a centre, or maybe even an N-connector model. On that basis, it's probably more accurate to say that this Nissan costs about the same as a rival Hyundai Ioniq Electric and will undercut the rival e-Golf by a couple of thousand. It's still way cheaper than that rival BMW though, and also way cheaper than any plug-in hybrid models you might be looking at. These start from around £25,000, but most cost considerably more than that. Not that you should ignore the entry-level Vizia version of this Leaf. Equipment-wise, it gives you most of what you need at a price not very much greater than what you'd pay for a smaller, much less powerful, cheaper-feeling EV model like, say, a Renault Zoe. Perhaps more relevantly, thanks to that government subsidy, we've now got to the point where full EV technology can be yours for pretty much the same money as you'd pay for a comparably sized family hatch model with conventional diesel power. The least expensive Volkswagen Golf TDI you can buy, for example, costs only fractionally less than Nissan is asking here, and costs fractionally more if you consider it with the automatic gearbox that you'd need for a properly relevant comparison. You don't need us to tell you that diesel family hatches like that represent another world in terms of the kind of cruder, smokier technology they offer. If, having considered all of this, you decide that it is a Nissan Leaf that you really want, then you're going to need to want to know exactly what's included in the standard spec. Well, let's see. Now, with the previous generation Leaf, a private buyer would probably never have bought the entry-level Vizia version because it lacked key elements of technology. Things like a regenerative brake mode, remote charging functionality and a quick charge port. Now, all that's now included with Vizia spec variants of this second generation Leaf, as well as a 6.6 kilowatt-hour onboard charger and that clever e-pedal driving system, along with a number of the niceties you'd want in a car of this price. Things like cruise control with a speed limiter, a decent infotainment system operable via a 7-inch centre dash screen, automatic air conditioning you can set to cool or warm the cabin in advance, and a full suite of electronic camera-driven safety equipment, which we'll cover off in a few minutes. All the charging stuff you'll need is standard too, so you'll get a 7 kilowatt wall box for your garage as part of the deal, to which you can attach the provided Mode 3 Type 2 charging cable. If, when you're out and about, you've only got access to a slow power source with a 3-pin socket, there's an EVSE charging cable for that. And if you're fortunate enough to come upon one of the fast charging points springing up around the country, there's a 50 kilowatt CHAdeMO quick charger socket for super quick battery replenishment. All of that comes with Vizia spec. Nissan reckons, though, that 99% of Leaf customers are going to want to stretch a little further up the range. The next level up, a centre, is the one you'll need to get somewhere close to the kind of equipment haul that you could expect with the direct segment rivals I mentioned earlier. And a centre trimmed Leaf gives you 16-inch alloy wheels, front fog lights, a rear view camera, a faster heater and a leather trimmed steering wheel. Plus you get the upgraded Nissan Connect EV7 infotainment system that includes an upgraded 6-speaker version of the DAB audio system, Apple CarPlay and Android Auto smartphone mirroring technology, and a navigation system able to guide you to the nearest public charge point. If you want to go further, paying more for N connector spec will see you treated to 17-inch alloy wheels, privacy glass, power folding mirrors, part leather upholstery and an auto-dimming rearview mirror. Plus there are all-round parking sensors that work with an intelligent around view monitor that gives you Nissan's moving object detection system that'll highlight kids, people or pets that may be in your path as you manoeuvre. As an option at this level, you can also pay extra for the ProPilot semi-autonomous driving package. This a combination of the active cruise control and lane keeping assist systems that you may be familiar with from more conventional cars. At the press of a button, this setup will automatically steer, accelerate and brake the car on roads where the system's camera can read road markings and sense the car in front. ProPilot comes as standard on the ritziest Leaf model, the Techno variant that we're testing today. Other niceties on this flagship variant include full leather upholstery, a 7-speaker Bose premium audio system, full LED headlamps with auto levelling, a heat pack which warms the front seats and the steering wheel, and an electronic parking brake. And you have to have Techno trim if you're going to get the option of paying extra for another of the really desirable features developed for this Mark II model Leaf, the ProPilot Park system, a hands-off, feet-off automatic parking function. It really is very clever. You activate it at low speeds and the system will find you an appropriate space and ask if you want to park the car there. If you do, ProPilot Park will take care of everything else, automatically moving your Leaf frontwards or backwards into the space, parking perfectly and applying the parking brake when the manoeuvre is complete. Having mentioned options, let's talk about extras available across the range. It's a pity the brand no longer offers the option of a rear roof spoiler incorporating space-age solar cells that boost battery power, but there are now a wider range of options you can have. We'll start with the basics. All Leaf buyers will have to pay extra for a temporary spare wheel, and lower down the lineup you'll probably want to take up the option of paying extra for parking sensors. On an Ascenta variant you can add in heat for the front seats and steering wheel, and on an N connector model you can add in the full LED headlights. Across the range, unless you want your Leaf finished in a bog standard solid red, you'll need to be paying Nissan more for one of the other paint finishes available, either solid Arctic white or one of the various extra cost metallic, premium metallic or pearlescent shades. We've got Spring Cloud Metallic here, which as you can see is a kind of bluey greeny grey. If you're buying an N connector or Techno trimmed Leaf and you're happy to have your car painted in premium metallic storm white, you'll be offered the option of a two-tone finish that'll see the roof and the mirrors done in pearl black. Enough on that. What about safety kit? As we all know, technology in this regard has progressed a great deal since the original Leaf model was first launched, and this Nissan has needed to move with the times. The most important standard safety system fitted across the range is the brand's intelligent emergency braking setup that works via a camera that scans the road ahead in search of potential accident hazards as you drive, with sensitivity that's especially good at picking out people thanks to an incorporated pedestrian recognition feature. If a potential problem is detected, you'll be warned. If you don't respond or aren't able to, the brakes will automatically be applied to decrease the severity of any resulting accident. Also now standard on all Leaf variants is a lane departure warning system which gently vibrates through the steering wheel rather than beeping annoyingly as this kind of setup does on some other cars. Plus there's an intelligent lane intervention feature that'll gently steer you back into your lane if you've unintentionally deviated from it. Cross traffic alert warns you of oncoming vehicles if you're reversing out of a space. Traffic sign recognition pictures speed signs as you pass and displays them on the dash. And blind spot warning works on the move to alert you if you're about to pull out into the path of another motorist. In addition, there's intelligent trace control, which adds light braking to the front wheels during tight cornering, loading up the front of the car and planting the tyres more firmly on the tarmac for extra traction. More conventional standard safety features include ESP stability control, 6 airbags and ISOFIX child seat fastenings. Plus there's the usual tractional and braking aids including brake assist to help in emergency stops and hill start assist to stop you from drifting backwards on uphill starts. You'll want big time savings if you're thinking of a full EV model. Does this second generation Leaf deliver them? Let's see. It certainly ought to, given that it can now go much further on a single charge. We'll start with that. As mentioned elsewhere in this film, the officially quoted driving range is 168 miles, calculated under the new WLTP combined cycle test, or Worldwide Harmonised Light Vehicle Testing Procedure, which is supposed to produce more realistic, real-world consumption results for cars like this. The WLTP Urban Cycle Test reckoned that this Nissan would cover up to 258 miles if it were operating only in city driving conditions. You'll be able to improve both these figures if, instead of the standard 40 kilowatt-hour model that we've been testing here, you go for the uprated 60 kilowatt-hour derivative you can talk to your dealer about. But that's a lot more money, so for our purposes here, we'll assume the 40 kilowatt-hour version is going to be your preferred choice. If some of your friends dismiss these figures as being a little below par, they're not being realistic. Yes, there are indeed Tesla EV models that will go a lot further on a single charge, but one of those could easily cost you 3 or 4 times what you'll be paying here. If instead you content yourself to comparing more relevantly with directly equivalent rivals, then this Nissan showing, though still not ideally what we'd like, stacks up very well indeed. Yes, you'll see rivals quoting higher combined range figures than 168 miles, but these will have been calculated using the old, less relevant NEDC, that's New European Driving Cycle test. For reference, the Leaf's NEDC figure is 235 miles. That compares to NEDC showings of 186 miles for a Volkswagen e-Golf and just 124 miles for the electric-only version of BMW's i3. In fact, only the Renault Zoe, a smaller super mini-sized EV hatch that uses much of this Nissan's engineering, can get anywhere close to the kind of range possible from a Leaf. But even then, the WLTP figure will still be around 28 miles less than you get in this Nissan. So it's a strong showing and a useful improvement over what the first generation Leaf model could deliver. For reference, final versions of that old car, which used a lower capacity 24 kilowatt-hour battery, quoted a 129 mile NEDC range figure. The last time we tested a Mark 1 model Leaf, we found that what we actually got was about 80 properly usable miles between each charge. In comparison, throughout this test, we've been getting about 120 usable miles of use. Obviously, if we'd driven with more of a feathery foot on the throttle or restricted our test route to more exclusively urban roads, we would have done better. Nissan says that some owners regularly get close to 150 miles between charges, and we can believe that. Either way, to even get an early 3-figure driving range, you're going to need to make copious use of the various driving aids Nissan provides. An eco mode restricts throttle travel, and there are 2 ways of harvesting regenerative energy that will slow down the battery's rate of power drain. As with the previous Leaf, the most obvious way of doing this is by selecting the provided B ratio on the gearbox, which gleans regeneration energy from the powertrain. With this Mark II model, there's the extra option of using the standard E-pedal system, which in addition also gains regenerative energy from the friction brakes. Plus, of course, there are lots of energy readout screens for you to keep an eye on. The one you'll tend to use most is the power meter driving gauge that features to the left of the speedometer in the instrument binnacle. The idea here being to keep the needle in the blue eco band as often as possible in a bid to keep up the percentage figure in the battery graphic just below. Also selectable on this same screen is an energy economy readout that rates your frugality in miles per kWh. The same figure will also display in the Eco Drive report, which displays at the end of each trip, which will also show the regenerative mileage accumulated. Switch your attention to the Centre Dash Nissan Connect EV7 monitor and you'll find two more tools in the setup's useful zero emissions menu. An energy usage screen that shows the kilowatt usage of the vehicle motor, the air conditioning and various ancillaries, and a driving range screen uses coloured radius graphics on a country map to show the extent of the journey you can undertake with the battery range the car has remaining. Enough on driving range and the things you can do to improve it. What about charging? The Nissan Connect EV7 infotainment system that all Leaf variants above Vizier spec get will show you where your nearest charging points are, but unfortunately it doesn't show you what type of charging the point in question provides. 3-pin domestic style, 7 kWh or 50 kWh. Fortunately, there are plenty of websites that will give you this information. Zap-map.com and polar-network.com are two of the most popular. A downloadable smartphone app offers another way of finding your nearest charging point. Plus, this app will allow you to monitor your car's state of charge, set charge times, and preheat or pre-cool the cabin to the ideal temperature before setting off, so that you won't have to drain the battery once you get underway with excessive use of the climate control system. Of course, the most important charging you'll be doing will be overnight at home. When it comes to this, we've always wondered why EV makers insist on charging extra for the wall box that you really have to have as a conditional part of electric vehicle ownership. After all, you'd never charge a car of this sort from an ordinary 3-pin plug unless you were out and about and absolutely had to. This Leaf, for example, takes a yawning 21 hours to charge from an ordinary 10-amp household electricity socket. So you'll need the 7 kilowatt 32 amp wall box that, thanks to Nissan's use of a government grant, comes as a free part of the purchase package, assuming you've got somewhere to install it. If you've owned a Leaf or another kind of electric car in the past and already have a wall box, it may need upgrading. That too will be free of charge. The installation or upgrade at your property will be done by either ChargeMaster or PodPoint, Nissan's accredited suppliers. Once the right wall box is in place, your Leaf will be able to replenish itself in 7.5 hours. Or to put it another way, it'll easily sort itself out completely overnight. If you're in a real hurry to replenish the battery in your Leaf and can find one of the few public fast charging points about that can deliver 50 kilowatt of high voltage direct current, then so much the better. You'll find them at most motorway service stations, where Ecotricity will typically charge you around £6 for a power top-up, and the vast majority of Nissan dealers where use will be free. An Ecotricity app will show you where these rapid charging stations are, and if you find one, you'll be able to use the 50 kilowatt Chadabo quick charger supplied with the car, accessed via a separate quick charge port alongside the standard charging port. This will give the battery of this Nissan an 80% top-up in between 40 and 60 minutes. If and when these rapid charging points are added in at garages and motorway service stations across our land, there'll be a rush for electric vehicles like this one. For home charging, you'll want to use that downloadable app app I mentioned earlier, which allows you to set the car to charge at off-peak electricity rates. If you're wise in this regard, Nissan reckons the daily charging process will add no more than about £25 to your monthly electricity bill, which most will happily pay to offset the average monthly £145 outlay they'd otherwise have spent fueling an equivalent petrol or diesel motor. To be specific on fuel savings, reckon on it costing you about 2 pence per mile to run a Leaf, in comparison to about 10 pence per mile in a modern diesel rival. And before you ask, yes, that does take into account the increased electricity charges you would incur in this Nissan. Or at least in theory, you'd incur extra home electricity charges in using a Leaf. It doesn't have to be like that. The recent introduction of vehicle-to-grid, or V2G technology, opens up the possibility of two-way charging, allowing electric vehicles to be fully integrated into your home electricity network, and indeed into the national grid. So, how could that work for you? Well, Nissan has partnered with technology supplier Eaton to create a so-called X storage unit that you can get installed in your house. The price will be in the region of £4,000 to £7,500, depending on unit capacity. This can draw power from both the national grid and, if you have them, from solar panels on the roof of your home to recharge your Leaf. But it can also take power back from this Nissan if you haven't used it all on your daily commute. Let's say, for example, that the car has started the day fully charged, but you've only needed to do, say, 20 to 30 miles, and so have ended the day with an almost fully charged battery. If you were then to connect the car up to an X storage unit, that remaining energy could be powering all your home electricity needs for the whole of that evening, and any remaining energy could then be funneled back into the national grid, earning you charge rebates. On that basis, it's easy to see how you could run a car like this without incurring any electricity charges at all. The possibilities are all quite exciting if you choose to fully explore them. But even if you can't be bothered with all of that, you'll soon learn to sort out your own personal Leaf charging regime, with plugging in at night or topping up the battery at a public point when you go shopping becoming second nature. Should the very worst happen though, and you forget to connect up, head off in a rush and find yourself stranded out of range on the highway halfway to where you're going, Nissan will provide a free pan-European recovery service to sort you out and tow you home or to the nearest charging point. That's valid for a lifetime of ownership, provided that you've had the car regularly maintained at one of their dealers. A Leaf stranded by the roadside isn't, after all, very good advertising for the brand. But it's unlikely to ever come to that. To ensure that it doesn't, your dealer will give you what the company calls its Care EV Leaf Customer Commitment Promise, a scheme offering a series of peace of mind pledges. To start with, you'll be offered a proper 24-hour test drive to enable you to properly get to know your car before you sign on the dotted line for it. And as an owner, you'll always be able to rapid charge your Leaf with that CHAdeMO quick charger for free at any Nissan dealership equipped with a rapid charging unit. A fast growing number have. Just check for your nearest location. There's also a battery quality guarantee covering capacity battery loss, that's below 9 bars out of 12, within the first 8 years or 100,000 miles. Finally, as a rather nice finishing touch, Nissan promises in the first 3 years of ownership to give you up to 14 days of free car hire of one of its petrol or diesel models, should you find yourself needing to take a really long trip. What else might you need to know? Well, as a Leaf owner, you'll be exempt from the London congestion charge, and from the second year of ownership, you won't have to pay an annual VED tax disc charge. Even on an alternative fueled vehicle, you'd only have to budget, well, £130 a year for that. For company car users, electric vehicles offer potentially huge tax savings, as they incur benefit-in-kind taxation fixed at just 9%, compared to 22% for a diesel car emitting 100 grams per kilometre of CO2 or just over. As for your warranty, well, it's the usual Nissan 3-year, 60,000 mile package for standard components. Plus, there's that supplementary coverage plan for the battery that I just mentioned. Maintenance will obviously be cheaper. An electric vehicle does, after all, have 20% fewer moving parts. Service intervals on a Leaf are every 18,000 miles, the same as on something like a diesel-powered Nissan Qashqai. Nissan offers a system of fixed-price servicing options, starting at around £150 for a minor service, so cheaper than you'd pay for a petrol or a diesel model. Nearly all the cost is made up of labour, since there won't be any engine parts to replace. There are 2, 3, 4 and 5-year service plans available. If you're wondering about residual values, well, these will vary depending on future market take-up of EVs. At the moment, any electric vehicle will shed its value faster than a conventional petrol or diesel model, but that state of affairs could change very quickly as prevailing public opinion is shaped by the media. Independent experts reckon that a high-spec Techno-grade Leaf variant like this one will hold its value fractionally better than lower-spec variants. The prediction is that after 3 years and or 60,000 miles, a Leaf Techno would still be worth 31.2% of its original asking price. Insurance on all Leaf models is rated at Group 21. That's the same as a BMW i3, but higher than a Volkswagen e-Golf or a Renault Zoe. And what about the green issues? Well, you can tell your green-bearded friends that nearly 100% of the vehicle weight is recyclable, yes, including the battery pack, and that the bio-fabric used to trim the seats is 100% derived from sugarcane. But this whole issue of eco-friendliness is, of course, a lot more complicated than that. Some in the green lobby get very angry about the whole pure electric car, zero emissions ethos. They reckon that ignores the well-to-wheel demands of supplying the electricity that powers cars of this kind. I'd respond by pointing out that these people usually completely overlook the fact that CO2 figures for conventional cars fail to take into account the logistical cost of getting fuel to the pump. Still, if you're one of those enviro-conscious folk, I'll tell you that it's been calculated that the burden of filling your batteries in this car will result in a theoretical 40 to 50 grams per kilometre of CO2 being released into the atmosphere, based on typical use of the UK's energy grid. Which means that a Leaf driver will still be having nearly half the environmental impact of a small petrol-electric family hatch like Toyota's Prius. As the concept of all-electric motoring becomes more normal, so the cars that champion it should also increasingly be seen in that way. The first generation version of this Nissan couldn't be. Its restricted operating range made it a model that few ordinary buyers could countenance, and those who could justify one had to be people prepared for something futuristic, sophisticated and quirky. As a result, the original Leaf found itself aiming at a very narrow niche indeed. Nissan's EV remit has been broadened quite a bit with the second generation version of this design. Only longer journeys now require nervous range calculation. The looks won't leave the neighbours assuming you've joined the Green Party. Charging's now more straightforward, and the interior no longer makes you feel like you're in some kind of concept car. You'll quickly adapt to the smooth driving demeanour made possible by the clever e-pedal. And the extra connectivity, the semi-autonomous driving aids and the stronger standards of safety are all welcome. As before, most likely buyers will probably be considering this as a second or maybe even a third vehicle for short-run use. I'll wager though that once they get one in the driveway, they'll be using it for 80% of the time. But, of course, there's still plenty of scope for improvement. The Leaf is better value than its direct rivals, but in terms of cabin quality, it still lags a little behind some of them. And there are a few little issues, like the lack of full steering wheel adjustment, for example, that really should have been sorted by now. More importantly, the genuine 200-mile operating range we were hoping for prior to the launch of this model can only be approached if you pay a lot more for a version of this car with the gutsier 60 kilowatt-hour battery. These things apart, we're hugely impressed with the way that this Nissan has been evolved from the rather individualistic confection it used to be. Of course, like any electric vehicle, it can't appeal to everyone. Family hatch buyers without a garage will join single car families and long distance commuters in dismissing it out of hand. But then no car is for everyone. As the Japanese brand points out, you wouldn't buy a GTR supercar for family use or an X-Trail SUV as a city runaround. Where Nissan has succeeded, though, is in finally offering us a relatively affordable, family-sized, pure electric car that's pretty free of compromise, a model you could pretty painlessly switch into from something more conventional. Which leaves us with what? Another defining moment in electric vehicle history? It certainly feels like it.